most politicians were not really concerned whether it's 3.5 or 3.7. The economists was a divided house, but the predominant opinion amongst the economists was that you gave a pause last year. Now, you can't be the fastest growing economy in the world, and with oil prices in their 30s, you still say that I can't maintain a fiscal discipline in this country, and you can't do it 2 years in a row. I think two things are extremely important. The first is not that you maintain fiscal deficit, it's the quality of fiscal deficit. The UPA also maintained a certain figure for several years, but they did it with huge cuts. There are only two ways you can maintain fiscal deficit. Either you earn more or you spend less. They maintained it by spending less. When you spend less, you compromise on growth. Year 2015 and 16 has helped me to establish the credibility of this government, that after years or after ages relatively, the revised estimates are going to be higher than the budget estimates. So we have spent more, we have earned more, we have maintained this fiscal deficit of 3.9, therefore the quality of fiscal deficit is very high. It's not achieved by spending less, and that's why it's contributing to some growth. And this year, therefore, the pendulum swung in way of credibility. And having got the benefit of low oil prices and various factors, when we totaled up, with some difficulty we realized we could make it. And we haven't compromised on expenditure. I keep my fingers crossed by the end of the year we are able to reach that. But while I was discussing with people, some very eminent people whose wisdom I respect, came out with a suggestion that does India need a single point fiscal deficit, or could it be a range? Could we have said it's between 3.4 and 3.6? So you have some flexibility, you don't cut down on pro-poor schemes, etc. I thought it was a point worth consideration. So whereas for this year I will stick to 3.5, for the future we'll have the wisdom of some expert opinion that could it be a narrow range? Because today it's no longer alarming fiscal deficit. You're not 5 point something. You are 3 point something, moving towards 3 and maybe lower. And therefore we can have the luxury of that range or not. I won't decide. I'll first take expert opinion, who look at models internationally, and then come back to it.
Mr. Minister, this year's nominal growth, your budget projects at 8.6%, the current year. And for the next year, your nominal growth projection is 11%. And this year, your revenue growth has been around 17%, whereas you are projecting next year a revenue growth of only 11%. And I'm also drawing your attention to the fact that on the services tax revenue front, you're only showing a growth rate of 1%. So can you just take us into this entire revenue growth numbers? Are these slightly on the lower side? You have been conservative and very modest?
I'd rather be conservative and improve. For example, I may end the current year, despite stressed private sector balance sheets, with a higher revenue. Now, current year is an exception. I'm conscious of that. Because if the prices fall to about $30, $32 of oil, then obviously I was able to pass part of the burden to the consumer, and part of the burden I took as cess, etc., which I was able to spend on infrastructure. And therefore the additional revenue measures, so if the growth is about 13% plus minus, the rest came by way of additional revenue measures. And those additional revenue measures help us. Maybe that luxury is not available in the next year, because you don't expect how much will the oil prices go down. It's a matter of speculation, but you have to have some fair assessment on that. And therefore you assume you collect as much as you did in this year, plus a little more. I think as far as the next year is concerned, one of the reasons which our nominal growth has been of concern is that for 15 months WPI has been in the negative. And therefore when you average it with CPI, That's the formulation the economists follow. Even though your growth may be 7.5%, your nominal growth with 7.5%, which used to be during UPA 12 and 14%, turns out to be 8.6 because the inflation index is very low. So it will all depend on what the inflation index is, and therefore you've taken a moderate 11% growth rate as far as revenue is concerned. If we are able to collect more, then of course we'll be able to reach the target very comfortably.
Arunji, one of the central themes seemingly from outside seems to be that there's a budget for Bharat. Whether you look at your expenditure, you have given a huge thrust to rural distress, agri. Even on the taxation side too, you have leaned heavily on the rich. So is it a right surmise to make?
You see, first of all, let's come to the taxes. Collecting an additional 19,000 or so in a budget of 20 lakhs means it's a 1%. What are the items and who are the people we are taxing? You are taxing products which are environmentally harmful. The largest contribution comes from coal. Secondly, you are taxing products which relate to health. And thirdly, you are taxing essentially the rich. In fact, to the weaker sections and to the middle class, in many aspects of this budget give a huge relief. I can subsequently explain it in detail. Now, where do you spend this money? You see, our services are doing reasonably well. The stress is really agrarian. Now, the UPA used to spend 8 to 9,000 on rural roads. This year, you are going to spend 27,000 crores. 3 times the amount. So you spend on roads, you spend on irrigation, you spend on electrification, you spend on education in the rural areas. Manrega will be the highest ever expenditure this year because there is a stress in the rural areas, so you put more money into the rural areas. 15,000 crores, the interest subvention will be the highest this year. You will have a crop insurance scheme. So a lot of these schemes then converge into much greater expenditure in the rural areas because that's where you need money, that's where you need jobs, that's where you need to improve rural incomes. That's the most vulnerable part of your economy. So why not help that sector? You see, whether it's political considerations or economic considerations, both converge in that direction, that you must help that segment of the economy. And that's where we weighed in favor of.
अर्थव्यवस्था के सामने बहुत सारी चुनौतियां हैं और आपका ये बजट इससे बहुत आशाएं थी सब एक्सपर्ट्स को, तो आपके हिसाब से ये बजट उन सारी चुनौतियों को उसको मीट कर पाएगा?
देखिए, ये निर्णय तो अन्य लोग लेंगे, मैं नहीं ले सकता, लेकिन हमने जो अर्थव्यवस्था का विश्लेषण किया है उस विश्लेषण के अनुकूल जहां जहां पैसा खर्च करना चाहिए था और जो जो नीतियां अपनाई जा सकती थी हमने की हैं। हमने ग्रामीण क्षेत्रों में किया, हमने रूरल इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में किया। अब 3 सोशल सेक्टर स्कीम्स, पहले तो हम इंश्योरेंस, बीमा, पेंशन, फाइनेंशियल इंक्लूजन ये सब लाए थे। इस बार हमने क्या किया कि हर बीपीएल परिवार के घर तक गैस का चूल्हा पहुंचे। वो क्यों मिट्टी के चूल्हे में से कुकिंग करें, स्वास्थ्य के ऊपर भी असर पड़ता है। तो टारगेटेड सब्सिडी है गरीब को, उसका एलपीजी की तरह अमीर फायदा उठाएंगे वो नहीं है। दूसरा, हमने स्वास्थ्य के लिए बीपीएल के लिए एक हेल्थ स्कीम जिसकी डिटेल्स वर्कआउट हो रही हैं। पिछले साल सरकारी खजाने में जितना अनक्लेम्ड पैसा था मैंने कानून बनाकर उसको जब्त कर लिया था। उस पैसे के प्रीमियम से वृद्ध आयु के लोगों को जो बीपीएल के हैं एक्स्ट्रा 30,000 का स्वास्थ्य मिलेगा और गरीब को बीपीएल को 1 लाख, तो यानी बुजुर्ग लोग होंगे 1,30,000 तक जाएगा। उसके अलावा हमने ये तीनों टारगेटेड सब्सिडी है कमजोर वर्ग के लिए, क्योंकि सब्सिडी जब अमीर के पास जाती है, और इस बार के इकोनॉमिक सर्वे में एक अध्याय है कि अमीर को क्यों दी जाए, ये तीनों टारगेटेड है, तो हम उस दिशा में ले गए। अगर आप देखें कि मैं उसको सबसे महत्वपूर्ण निर्णय इस बजट का मानता हूं जो कानून मैंने कहा है, मैं 1-2 दिन में उसको इंट्रोड्यूस कर रहा हूं, वो तैयार है, मैंने नोटिस भी दे दिया है कि वो आधार यूनिक आइडेंटिटी से उसका संबंध नहीं है जो प्रीवियसली इशू सुप्रीम कोर्ट में पेंडिंग है, उस सब से वो अलग है। अगर आपको सरकारी पैसे से कोई सुविधा चाहिए, कोई सब्सिडी चाहिए, कोई लाभ चाहिए, सरकारी खजाने से जिसका अर्थ है, और सरकारी साधन खर्च होंगे, तो आपको आधार की आवश्यकता पड़ सकती है। उससे अनफेयर यूटिलाइजेशन ऑफ सब्सिडीज समाप्त होगी, टारगेटेड भी होंगी, गरीब तक पहुंचेंगी, और उससे बचत भी होगी। उस बचत का प्रयोग आप सोशल सेक्टर में करिए, आप इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में कीजिए। इस साल बजट में मैंने ग्रामीण क्षेत्रों में अगर खर्चा बढ़ाया है तो इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर में भी बढ़ाया है। मतलब इतना बड़ा रोड्स प्रोग्राम, ग्रामीण और हाईवे, रेल और रोड तीनों मिला लिए जाएं तो 2,20,000 के करीब खर्चा करोड़ का इन 2 क्षेत्रों में हो रहा है। इससे रोजगार भी बढ़ेगा, इन्वेस्टमेंट भी बढ़ेगी, ये सारे स्वाभाविक लाभ होंगे।
Mr. Finance Minister, there are 2 areas of concerns as far as your tax proposals are concerned. One is the limited period tax amnesty which you have announced for the tax evaders to come clean. Then the question in that respect is, do you think you are creating some sort of a moral hazard for taxation policy makers?
First of all,
and the second area of concern is that on your promise of reduction in corporate tax cut, which you made last budget, and also phasing out exemptions, could you have gone little more on that path?
You see, I'll answer both.
Yeah.
First of all, let me explain to you a very important tax. I think there are monumental income tax law changes I have made. First, on the exemption, on this scheme, it's not a VDIS. It is not amnesty. Inequality arises in an amnesty that on a certain income, you as an honest taxpayer have paid 30%, and I come as Johnny come late, and after 20 years I say I am also paying 30. So you have actually ended up as an honest taxpayer, ended up paying more. So on current values, I will have to pay 45. Amnesty is that you pay. That's how the 96 scheme was structured. This is not structured that way. You pay 30% tax plus 7.5 plus 7.5, which is 45. So you are ending up paying 1.5 times more. So you are paying penalties for not having paid tax in time. So there is no amnesty that you get. This is intended to bring in some monies outside the system into the system. There is a second scheme I have said, which is indirect taxes. If an appeal is pending, pay up to a certain point principal tax plus interest till the date of assessment. And if it's a higher amount, in some cases 25% penalty. And you can sort your past tax problems out. Similar scheme for customs, excise and service tax. If you have an issue of retrospective tax pending, no interest, no penalty, pay the principal amount. So I have tried to clean up the whole book. Then as far as the ordinary taxpayer is concerned, I think the most important aspects, besides giving some deduction advantages to small taxpayers, I think moving on in several cases to presumptive taxation. Small businesses, trade, shopkeeper, workshop, you are presumed to have an income of 8% if your turnover is up to 2 crores. On 8%, get your deductions, pay the tax and be done with. No books are called for. If you want to pay on less, then maintain your books. For all professionals, and there is a large amount of evasion in certain professions, the presumption is 50% presumptive tax. That's taken as income and pay. Actually, these categories would get a huge advantage of paying tax, complying with the law, helping the government with taxes and building up their own capitals if they follow this procedure. And you can actually, between the service class, employed salaried class taxpayer and this payer, which is bulk of our taxpayers in numbers, it will be a simple one-page return and you may never have to see the tax office in your life. You just pay it online, submit your return, get your assessment order online, and unless there is some fraud involved, you ordinarily won't have to see the taxpayer. I think your second question was with regard to the corporate tax. You see, governments over the years have promised exemptions. If I had withdrawn those exemptions prior to the sunset clause, I would be accused of retrospective change. So I have now given notice of 4 reductions. That starts next year.
That's right.
So next year I will start getting the benefit of exemptions being diluted. This year I don't have the benefit of any exemption being diluted.
So you're not cutting the rate?
No. So I have taken 2 steps forward.
Only for small.
No. In the first instance, any new manufacturing company which comes up and doesn't claim exemption, he starts straight away with 25% tax slab. He doesn't have to pay 30, he starts with 25. The second is, any company with a turnover of 5 crores or less, the small ones, I have brought him down 1%, and I'll gradually bring it down. Next year, when some exemptions get into the sunset,
so one can hope for the rate.
Obviously. So it will be an ongoing process for the next couple of years. So today, without having benefited from exemptions being waived off, I have still given 2 concessions. So I have set last year I made an announcement, this year I have set the direction, and now it will slowly start petering off year after year till everybody comes down to 25.
कर के ये मामले में आपने जैसा कहा, ये नई योजना आप लेकर आए हैं। वोडाफोन और केन 2 बड़े-बड़े कॉर्पोरेट नाम हैं, और इस मामले में देश के टैक्स एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन का काफ़ी नाम खराब हुआ है। विदेशी निवेशकों ने इस पे काफ़ी रिप्रेजेंटेशंस दिए थे। तो आपको लगता है अब ये मामला, इस नई स्कीम से ये मामला सुलझ जाएगा?
तो जो असेसी है उसके ऊपर निर्भर करता है। ये कोई हमारी सरकार के दौरान नहीं हुआ, पुरानी सरकार में कानून बना। अब पुरानी सरकार में कानून बना तो उसका एक असर था रेट्रोस्पेक्टिव टैक्स का। मैं तो तब विपक्ष में था, मैंने सबसे तीखी आलोचना की थी। अब मैंने पहले बजट में कह दिया कि हम ना तो इसका प्रयोग करेंगे रेट्रोस्पेक्टिव अधिकार का, ना हमने किया है, और कोई नया नोटिस नहीं दिया। अब जो पुराने सरकार की मुसीबत हम झेल रहे हैं, तो पहला प्रयास हमारा था कि अदालतें इसको तय कर दें, वहां से नहीं तय हो पाया, तो मैंने एक कदम और आगे बढ़ाया है कि अगर कोई एसएससी चाहे तो बिना इंटरेस्ट, ब्याज और पेनल्टी के मैं इसको समझौता करने को तैयार हूं, और इस पे पार्लियामेंट की मोहर लगेगी।
Arun ji, I want to take you to another paradigm shift seemingly in this budget is on subsidies. Your government has been always talking about targeted subsidies, but now you have formalized it. You're saying you're planning to introduce a bill which will be again linked to Aadhaar. So is it like the moment where public policy is signaling that subsidies will go only to the deserving and the poor?
Yeah, that's how it should be. You see, in my very first year in Parliament, I had raised a question. I asked Mr. Khadge why he and I should be entitled to an LPG subsidy. That set the agenda. I was the first person, I surrendered my connection, then all ministers surrendered it, then MP started surrendering it. Today 75 lakh people have surrendered it. Now, if 75 lakh people have surrendered it, plus the benefit of this scheme that we have started, in this year we are going to give 1.5 crore BPL families the LPG connection. We will subsidize the first connection and then they will take over themselves. Similarly, the target is to reach 5 crore families in the BPL category. Now, fortunately, because of the oil, petrol and diesel, we've been able to get rid of. But then there are several other products. I have also announced today that I am going to test by a pilot scheme the fertilizer through this scheme. So the object of this legislation will be identification. Why should anybody be able to claim it twice? At some stage you can say, why should the wealthy be able to claim it? That's how the thought in the society will increase. That's not the thought today. It's a thought for LPG, it's not a thought for other products. But then this discussion, when it takes over, will eventually lead to a situation where this discussion will continue. And I hope there is a consensus on these issues, that in India you have many poor people, you have a limited resource, The poor are entitled to the benefit of that limited resource. The rich should not benefit from that resource.
But those denied the subsidies, don't you fear some kind of political backlash, particularly from the middle class who might be left out?
देखिए ऐसा है कि if you see this, I don't think the middle class really wants subsidies. They want good services. You see the effect of what has happened today by subsidizing electricity for those who own air conditioners.
That's right.
Should those who own air conditioners get subsidized electricity? Then who pays? So the state governments found a very easy answer, saying public sector banks will pay. So look at the plight of what happened to the banks. Now if the banks stop supporting the electricity discoms, you'll have power failures in those states. So that scheme has proved counterproductive. Therefore you want to give it out of your budget, but give it only to the poor people who deserve them.
Mr. Finance Minister, you made two announcements which your critics will describe as very ambitious. One is your disinvestment target. Although you did not reach the full target of 69,500 crore, and you going to end the year maybe with 25,000 crore going by your budget documents, and there is no strategic sale at all. And in spite of that, you are proposing to raise around 55,000 crore next year. And the second announcement is about the banking, consolidation of banking in the public sector space. Now, could you take our viewers into
You
this?
see,
What are your plans on both the areas?
As far as disinvestment is concerned, this was a very difficult year. You had a turmoil in the markets. And therefore, the stocks which were most adversely impacted were the oil stocks, the metal stocks, the commodity stocks. Now, I am not in a desperate situation that in terms of my fiscal deficit, that I must sell at rock bottom prices. After all, this is public property. So prudence was, I stopped. So some 24,000 crores odd, we will be able to make this year. Always remember, though we had stakes, strategic sales in the NDA 1, we totally were able to sell around 28,000 worth of stocks. In the first 1.5 years, I've been able to sell more than 40,000 without any controversy. Therefore, I'm still continuing. Last week we had the NTPC. We probably in March may go in for 1 or 2 more areas. If you read the paragraphs on we will divest, we will also have strategic sales, plus we will also have asset disinvestment.
So that's a new initiative you're taking.
The asset diversion is that if a public sector unit has several units, a company has several units, can you dissect one which need not be in the public sector? Globally, this is called asset recycling. So if a power company divests 2 of its plants, and from the money it gets, the company gets the money, these plants go into private sector, and the money that the company gets, in some more deserving areas, it sets up 2 more plants. So the country will have 4 plants in the process. So this is asset recycling. So I have also said that we are going to consider this as an option. I've set an ambitious target, and hopefully if the markets are not as choppy as they were this year, we will probably be somewhere closer. And your second question was?
Bank consolidation.
You see, on bank consolidation, I think...
Does it mean winding up banks which are not viable?
No, it doesn't mean that. It doesn't mean that. I have said bringing below 50% is only in relation to IDBI. Right. The rest of the rest of the banks, that 52% limit which the UPS government had set, that government holding remains. The first step is the balance sheets of these banks. And the balance sheet got adversely impacted because of management issues as also some sectoral issues. Now, most of those sectors I have mentioned, we've been trying to address, whether it's steel or it's power or it's sugar, we've been trying to address those, or highways, we've tried to address those sectors. Infrastructure projects, if you see, I have now brought 3 different proposals to settle disputes so that projects which are at a standstill can move together. One is a legislative one. Now, the effect of all this is going to be that first bring the health back. Then in some cases, a weak bank and a strong bank, subsidiaries and the parent bank. Now, these are all options. India still needs public sector banks, but do you need so many of them and some of them very weak? Or do you need fewer in number but strong banks?
And that's your blueprint for the next year.
And that's what I've indicated when I've spoken in terms of consolidation. But this consolidation will come, but I would also, it's not an alternative to improving their balance sheets.
तो ये सरकार की तरफ से बैंकों को नज किया जाएगा, उन्हें कहा जाएगा कि आप देखिए, या ये बैंकों के ऊपर छोड़ा जाएगा?
देखिए, बैंकिंग के संबंध में ये कोई परिस्थिति हमारी शासन में तो आई नहीं। ये पुराने लोन से सब सेक्टर्स कमजोर हुए, उन सेक्टर्स की कमजोरी का हल ढूंढने के लिए कोई कदम नहीं उठाए गए। अब हमने सारे कदम उठाए हैं। स्टील में जो कदम उठाए हैं, अगले 1-2 क्वार्टर्स में उसका असर बैंकों की बैलेंस शीट पे नजर आना शुरू हो जाएगा। जिसको ट्विन बैलेंस शीट प्रॉब्लम कहा है इकोनॉमिक सर्वे ने, वो ये है, पहले इस सेक्टर की बैलेंस शीट खराब होती है और फिर उसका प्रभाव बैंक की बैलेंस शीट के ऊपर पड़ता है, क्योंकि वो उधार वापस नहीं कर पाते। दूसरी इसकी परिस्थिति ये होती है कि जैसे शुगर में हुआ, आपके हाईवेज में हुआ, अब ये 3 सेक्टर्स में सुधार आया है। अभी टेक्सटाइल तकलीफ में है, अभी पावर तकलीफ में है। अभी उदय स्कीम लागू होने के बाद उसके रिजल्ट आएंगे, थोड़ा पावर उसका हल ढूंढेगा। तो बैंक्स की परिस्थिति सुधरे, पर बैंक्स का प्रशासन भी सुधरे, और इसलिए कल हमने गठित कर दिया है बैंकिंग बोर्ड ब्यूरो। अब बोर्ड्स पे कैसी नियुक्तियां होंगी, बैंक्स के चेयरमैन और मैनेजिंग डायरेक्टर्स किस प्रकार के होंगे, उन पे निगरानी कितनी होगी। और मुझे लगता है कि कई बार बैंकों को ये अधिकार मिले कि बैंक्स सरकारी तंत्र पे जो कानून लागू हैं उससे हटकर भी बैंकिंग कंसिडरेशंस पे अपना निर्णय कर पाए। वो स्वायत्तता भी बैंक्स को चाहिए। आज पब्लिक सेक्टर बैंक्स के जो अधिकारी हैं, अगर मान लीजिए उसको कहीं से 5,000 करोड़ दिया हुआ है और आज 4,500 करोड़ में सेटलमेंट होता है, तो कोई भी निजी व्यवसाय कर लेगा। पब्लिक सेक्टर बैंक वाला डरता है कि मुझ पे सीबीआई ना पहुंच जाए, और इस परिस्थिति में उसके लिए बैंक चलाना बहुत कठिन है।
Arun ji, there's another element of your budget was last year you accepted the 14th Finance Commission and basically declared a federal budget. This year you seem to have taken it to another level. You have allocated, I think, 3 trillion rupees to panchayats. So
no, this was the money allocated by the 14th Finance Commission itself.
Okay, so
and
it's
therefore,
not
I have just said that 14th Finance Commission has given so much to panchayat, so much to municipalities. And therefore, along with my speech this year, one need not read all the budget document. So grants to ministries, important decisions which I didn't want to read as a part of a long speech, plus grant on various schemes and allocation to states, I have given charts. So if you read those charts, the states, if you take the panchayat money, if you take the municipality money, if you take the grants, if you take the tax devolution, the states have never had it so good ever.
But one related question to that is, while states do get so much of funds, very often we have seen several states struggling with capacities to spend it, because conventionally they have been used to the
See,
center.
there are two features. All states, or most states, let me be politically correct and say it, most states take this advantage, and it's become a fashion to still complain. I haven't got enough. So when you show them the account that this is what you've got, but I've got more in this head but not in this head. So then you get into this argument. The second is the states are getting this money to share a part of into the poverty alleviation schemes. They are getting this money for infrastructure. They are not getting in this money to just give electorally linked largesse. If any state did that, they'll be not utilizing, putting this to optimum use. After all, states have a shared sovereignty in governing this country, and therefore they'll have to realize their responsibility.
But Mr. Finance Minister, this year, current year, if you look at the numbers a little more closely, you notice an interesting trend where the transfer to states from the central revenues.
3 major water plants have been shut down in Delhi, this time due to high ammonia levels. Major crisis in central and north Delhi. Aam Aadmi Party Minister Kapil Mishra is saying that the
पैसे वाले बाबू मेरा बजट बना दो, पैसे वाले बाबू मेरा बजट बना दो, बजट बना दो, बजट बना दो। पैसे